Happy Friday. We're going to be reviewing lesson one in the book, What on Earth Can I Do? By David Webb and John Hay. So I think the best way to start this off is to talk about Jeremiah 1:5, which is, before I formed you in the womb, I knew you. And God goes on to talk about how he has a plan for us. And at this point in your life, that can be exciting and scary at the same time. And trust me, we have all been there and we get it. The biggest thing to remember, though, is that God is ultimately in control. And where I have difficulties is when I try to figure out what the plan is or make a plan for myself and not really include God in it. God knows what we're going to do. He has designed a purpose for our life, and that's what this study is really looking at. So it's a very exciting time. It's okay to be scared. You have this blank slate, but that blank slate is also really exciting because it's really not so blank. God has prepared a great plan for you. It's just a matter of figuring out what that might be. And this first lesson does a really good job of highlighting some pretty amazing people in history. And it can be intimidating to look at the people that they mention, people like Corrie ten Boom, even Hitler, who was evil, but definitely had an impact on the world. And think, where am I going to fit in? But there's other people that are highlighted. So, for example, Claude Rains, the actor. They talked about how he backed up some of the most famous actors in the industry and did such a great job with grace and with humility. And so we all need different people in the world. We need those dynamic people that stand out. And we also need people who are working behind the scenes really hard at carrying out God's will. So don't feel like you have to be one of these amazingly impactful people. It doesn't mean that you won't be. When you look at Moses, Moses had a stutter. When God called on Moses, the first thing he said was, "I'm not an eloquent speaker." And God said, "That's okay." Where Moses got in trouble is he felt like he couldn't speak, so he turned the reins over to other people. And that's when we find the golden calf was created. There's a lot of things that happened because Moses didn't trust that what God gave him to do, he could accomplish. The secret is that we can accomplish anything as long as we're relying on God's strength to do it. Where we get in trouble is where we look at ourselves and say, well, I couldn't possibly do that. If God's telling you you can, and you can rely on Him. So, talking about some people who are kind of behind the scenes, when you think about David and Jonathan, Jonathan was his best friend, um, King David. Jonathan supported him, helped him survive, so he wasn't killed by King Saul. David really relied on Jonathan for his life, literally his life. And so there's other examples in scripture. You look at the innkeeper that put Jesus up, or not Jesus yet, since Mary was still pregnant, but you look at Joseph and Mary, and that innkeeper had a very important role. He provided a place for them. He didn't have any rooms, but he said, "Hey, you can use the stable, the barn." Um, and people came and worshiped at Jesus' feet in that barn. When you look in the New Testament, the Apostle Paul, everybody knows who Paul is, but there was also Barnabas, and Barnabas had almost as much a ministry as Paul did, and he did it with grace and love. There was a time that Barnabas and the Apostle Paul had a falling out. They had a fight, and it was because Barnabas was trying to show grace, and Paul came back and apologized for that. Barnabas's name actually means son of comfort, and that's what he was to so many people as he told people about Jesus. He also modeled grace, which was really important. Paul didn't quite understand that. Paul was a bit legalistic. So you needed people like Barnabas. We can have an impact in this world. You read about Hitler. It can either be good or it can be evil. And a lot of that depends on if we're relying on God and really following his plan for our life. One quote from the book that I really liked, Corrie ten Boom: "Every experience God gives us, every person he puts in our lives, is the perfect preparation for the future that only he can see." So nothing is a mistake. Certain people that you meet, certain situations you go through, God allowed those things to happen, but it was to bring growth and it was to bring us closer to Him. The biggest thing to remember when it comes to what is God's will for my life, what can I do, is to surrender. Don't fight it. Just go with what God shows you to do. He will lead you. Where we get in trouble, and I know myself, I get in trouble, is I fight God's will and I say, I don't want to do that. I want to do my own thing. And that's where we get into trouble. So it's really important to just listen and really people wonder, well, what does that look like? What does that mean? How do I know I'm fulfilling God's will? You just have to make a move. There's an old phrase, God doesn't steer a parked car. So you're sitting in the car of your life and you're like, where do I go? Just start out, start making moves, and He'll either open or close doors. The biggest example I can give, when I was a missionary, I was trying to decide, do I go to Mexico or do I go to Papua New Guinea? Those were my two choices that I had narrowed it down to. And honestly, what did I do? I flipped a coin. In the Bible, it's called casting lots. I flipped a coin and said, okay, whatever it comes up with is the route I'll go. And then I just started making moves towards it. Came up Papua New Guinea, by the way. I started making moves towards that. And then God either opened a door or closed a door. And He opened doors all the way that really just showed me, okay, I'm meant to go to Papua New Guinea. It worked out that I knew which base I was going to. I tested as a linguist. There were a lot of things that just led up to God confirming that I was making the right moves, going the right direction. The biggest example of this is with Abraham and Isaac in Genesis 22, 1 through 18. Abraham had waited so long to have another son. He was 99 years old, as was his wife, and they had Isaac. And he was such a joy to them, and they were just so excited for that gift. Well, when Isaac was around 8 or 9 years old, God said, I want you to sacrifice your son. So Abraham obeyed Him, and he walked up a mountain, and he got the fire ready, and he tied Isaac up in ropes, and he laid him on the fire. Not the fire, the altar. Laid him on the altar, getting ready to sacrifice him, and God said, stop. He said, stop. I can see that you are willing to sacrifice your only son. And Abraham looked, and there was a ram caught in some weeds, and God said, use that as your sacrifice. The interesting thing about this is He spared Abraham from sacrificing his son, but God didn't save Himself from that. And Jesus died on the cross for us, for all the things we did wrong. Jesus was perfect. So just a little side note on that one. But Abraham followed God. He said, okay, this is what you want for me. I'm going to do it. And then God spared him from it, and he didn't have to sacrifice Isaac. But it's that faith. It's in knowing that God is in control. And even going up the mountain, Isaac said, we're doing a sacrifice, Dad. Where's the sacrifice? And Abraham turned to Isaac and said, God will provide. And God did. He gave him the ram to sacrifice. So the important thing is knowing that God's in charge, knowing that He has a plan for you. But here's the key. Here's what we have to do in it. We have to get to know God. We have to get to know His voice. How do I know if it's my voice telling me to do something or God's? We have to be able to recognize God's voice. And the only way to do that is by getting close to Him, reading the scripture. That's what's so exciting about this class for me, is you're reading about God. You're reading about His scripture and you're drawing close to Him. You're journaling. And those are all things that will draw you closer to God. The only way to know what He wants for our life is to draw close to Him and then make moves and watch Him provide and open doors and direct. It's a very exciting time. I hope you enjoyed this first week. I will do videos like this every week, and we will get to know even more about God and about His plan for our lives. Take care and God bless.